We're live. So, Gary, thank you for coming and talking with me. I'm just going to give a quick introduction about why why I want to talk to people about kindness these days. So, through the Global Theater Project, we've been doing this project called the Four Pillars, which is standing on what the work that we've been doing and I've been doing for the last 15 years stands on, and I've kind of defined them as four pillars. For theater for social renewal, and the first is kindness, and then we have community, artistry, and what I call the whole artist elements, which down the line we'll get to describing. But kindness is an interesting one to start with, and I've been teaching it in class and really talking to people about it in class, and then talking about it with a lot of people over the last 7 to 10 days or so, and really trying to look at it in a deeper way, you know. And so I've had a couple conversations, oops, I dropped my earbud, in the last, during this period. And the first one was an interesting conversation with two people about that really we ended up talking. I think what I took away from it was that kindness is something that is not, it's innate in human beings, but it's not primitive in us. And what's more primitive is being groupish and territorial. And so kindness has to be taught, is sort of what we were talking about. We were dancing around that conversation, which is, I think, really an interesting idea of having to teach to grow people into kindness. And then in the next conversation, I spoke with a friend who's a theater artist, and our community is having a really tough time of it right now. But there's a lot within the artistic community that, in terms of fragility and the fragility of life that an artist lives, and we talked about that and what are the opportunities that we could give to those of us in our communities that are not artists, that maybe this is the first time that they're truly experiencing the fragility of life. And so we talked around that and about how important honesty is in kindness. And when I saw you on the street and we had that quick exchange, because we live so close to each other, and you had said, I think what you had said, if I recall correctly, is that it's a tough conversation. It's a tough thing to consider, kindness. And so when I walked away, I thought it would be so interesting to talk to you, because I think you, if anything, in what I know about you, you live in a world of honesty. You seem to look at something and then respond to it through your art in a very direct way. And sometimes I know it's controversial. Sometimes you go into areas that are controversial. And so I thought it would be really interesting to find out what you thought was difficult about talking about kindness, and where you think you find kindness in your work and in society. And I'll say one more thing, and then just sit back and listen for a little bit. We can go back and forth. A friend of mine sent me these images today. I want to see if I could actually share my screen with you, just to show you what she sent me. All right, let's see if I can do this. Well, no, you know what? I'm not going to do it. It's images of people in Pittsburgh, which I know you've lived in Pittsburgh, and they're all gunned up, and they're, carrying their semi-automatic weapons, and they're protesting stay-at-home orders. And so, I just wanted to talk about, like, is it too late for us to be kind? Like, how do we bridge these? And I'm not expecting you to have the answers, but these are my thoughts today, So that's basically what I'm throwing out now, in right across to you, and see what you have to say. And then we'll just, I'll just.
First of all, that issue is what I'm drawing about right now, is about the protesters, and I'm not being kind about it at all.
No, I imagine.
And I don't know if it's too late. I mean, I think of those people that are doing this protest totally based in ignorance. I consider that to be like the new dark ages, where people are willfully ignorant on a subject and then stand on corners yelling that ignorance, and then have the gall to arm themselves, which is a metaphor, besides being a phallic metaphor, is a metaphor for aggression, that they're basically saying, you don't mess with my ignorance. My ignorance is protected by weapons. And that is a very frightening thought.
Yeah.
It may be passive aggressive, but it sure looks aggressive to me. And it seems it could escalate into aggression. And the anti-Semitic images I've been seeing, and today was a photograph of a woman saying, the weak must die, to reopen the weak must die. And it was a woman holding this. So even, this idea of of a woman having, because women can give birth, they're connected to life in a different way than men. That woman basically was doing everything she could do to dispel that notion. But I have to tell you, so I do, in fact, it is a kind of honesty in the sense that ideas just kind of come to me fully formed. So I see what the cartoon is going to be in my head. And I don't actively, to the extent where I'm dealing with certain issues, and those are the ones I would like to be solved in my head, I'm not coaxing ideas. And so when we were talking about kindness, and I went about making dinner for the boys and talking, doing this and that, two images came to mind, and it was Jesus Christ, and of course I'm an atheist, Jesus Christ and Jimmy Carter. And part of that is, the alliteration, JC, that just is how my mind works. There's a certain sounds, but also because I think of Jimmy Carter as being a kind person. I don't think of a lot of people as being kind. When I think about people, I don't generally say, oh, that was a kind act. I might think that, but I don't think of people as being kind or unkind. I think a lot about empathy, and I think empathy is the single thing missing in a lot of the people we've been seeing that are Trump supporters, and Trump himself. Trump has absolutely incapable of feeling empathy. I'm convinced of it.
So do you
And I
think,
think,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no.
Do you think, where do you see the connection then between empathy and kindness?
I think acts of kindness come out of your ability, and I do believe that this is where I would find that empathy was a very important way that humans survived. And I do think it's not something that is taught. I think empathy is something that we need to survive. We need to be able to see in the other not just their suffering, but their joy and their poetry. It's Tavia, who is really good at listening to other people, and she's very good at finding the humanity in other people. She searches for it and she celebrates it. It's a skill I'm trying to learn from her. And Maxwell has it as well. And Maxwell, being Tavia's son, he
Well, and
has,
yours.
yes. But when he was 3 years old, our son Maxwell, his daycare person said, Max is the only 3-year-old I've ever met with empathy.
Mm.
That he thought outside of his own needs. And so I think empathy leads to kindness. That the idea that you would see a person who is weak for whatever reason, however we define what weak is, it's one of those things that I'm not sure I understand exactly. Is it? But I do understand what predator would think as weak. So are we talking about people who basically are predators in their thinking, that they see someone who's moving slower than the rest of the people and they say, oh, that'll be an easy mark? Is that what we're seeing in these people who are saying the weak must die for us to go back to our lives? And or is it the other thing besides empathy that I'm fascinated with is critical thinking. So if you're not able to put together that this global pandemic, or I guess that's redundant, but is happening everywhere. So if it's a conspiracy, right,
Mm.
it's really a good one. So you have to be able, but if you don't care, really, if you care more about whatever these activities are that people want to get back to, um, and critical thinking would lead me to believe that this would be a time for self-reflection, and we would analyze what about our lives that we were taking for granted, and maybe it was time to rethink how we spend our days, and whether getting your hair cut is of maximum importance, whether having being able to go and whatever. I don't even know what people are so convinced they're being denied of. I know that for theater, it's very important to have that human connection. For
Well,
cartooning, I'm pretty much living my days the way I usually do, except for I have my my great friend and love, Tavia, here every day, and I have my children here every day.
so
And,
what do you think might be the possibility that this reaction is fear-based, or that,
oh,
and then
yes,
how does
that's
kindness relate to that? Like, I'm just wondering, how could kindness and
it.
fear?
Would it takes someone a lot kinder than I am to confront this. Um, I mean, I tried being an escort at an abortion clinic, and I was way too aggressive with the protesters. I find, um, but I actually don't disagree with you that if somehow on a human level you could touch the people that have decided we are enemies because we don't think like they think, or that they think that I want something from them. I want their guns. I want their freedom. I want their God. Um, I'm perfectly willing for them to have all those things as long as they don't aim any of them at me. and, yeah, and but what I don't get is the aggression part. So if they're afraid, I can understand that Trump's success is based in the economic failure of, I would say, capitalism as a whole, but I know a lot of people would disagree with me, but certainly about the deindustrialization of America and the amount of lying that the working class was subjected to throughout the 80s and 90s and onward and to this day. Now they're being lied to about this money being allocated to save small businesses and then given to large businesses. There's a cynicism that power has that once it's revealed, they don't seem to act any differently. And I think working class people and the barely middle class people, a lot of them that follow Trump, are enraged and have been enraged for a long time. And the part that is race-based couldn't be more unfortunate and awful and ugly, but it's the mentality of losing your status in society and then just turning on the next group that you recognize as being below you. But that feeling of being left out of this package that we're sold as being the American dream. And I do think that kindness is lacking. But where has kindness gotten the people that feel left behind? I don't know.
Well, this is the question, right? I mean, is kindness and a caring society a weakness, or is a fear-driven society the weaker society? Like,
oh no, because
individual participation and individual contribution to a healthier functioning whole.
I think you would agree that the societies get the gods that reflects them, right? And the God of the people standing outside state capitals with flags and guns and crosses and rats with Jewish stars on them and Confederate flags and blue states. Those people's God is angry and vengeful and is going to cast people into hell and destroy enemies. That is not the God of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ no longer seems to be participating in Christianity, which of course to a cartoonist is just a lovely irony, but it's also very troubling. Because where is the kindness? If anything, Christ was teaching kindness. He was teaching empathy. He was teaching, put your hands on the leper. That idea of reaching out and touching the afflicted, regardless of whether they're dirty or crazy or all these things like that. That is something Jimmy Carter does, right? I mean, he builds homes for the homeless.
Yes.
He is relentless. And all that is a manifestation of kindness. And Obama crying at several funerals where he didn't care or he wasn't mindful that he should control, right, his emotion and look presidential in those moments. I will sing Amazing Grace, even if it's a tad bit out of tune. I will sing it because I feel it. And that was not a contrivance. That was Robert Kennedy speaking before a predominantly African-American audience in Indiana the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, and spoke and stopped. There were no riots in Indianapolis partially because of his interaction and call for people not to commit acts of violence. Yeah. Those were real moments of leadership.
And do you think that
our
those
government,
moments of leadership contained
and
some kind of,
all kindness. It
yeah,
was all the Robert Kennedy being able to say, we've all lost a leader and we have all lost a friend. And the people in that audience knew that Robert Kennedy was, in fact, friends with Martin Luther King.
yeah.
Robert Kennedy was friends with Cesar Chavez. Um, Robert Kennedy would have been friends, great grandfather. His political opposition, um, and his politic was not totally based in what was good for Robert Kennedy. He changed the way he thought during the Vietnam era because he heard the voices of protest and was able to say that, my brother was wrong, my party is wrong, and we need to seek a different way.
All right, well, then I have a
And
hard question for you, Gary. Here's a hard question. If he looked at the protesters, going back to how we started, and he heard them, and he thought, all right, I have to change my path. Is there anything that we can, if we take a kind view, that somewhere inside these people who are protesting these um, stay-at-home orders, even though these are not kind acts, even though they are very selfish in the sense that they are endangering potentially the lives of our healthcare workers and other members of the community. There is a lot of unkindness in their unconsciousness with in regards to this. Is there anything that we can find within these protests from our position, if we took a kind view of them and not just a judgmental one, which is very easy for both of us to take, and most people I know? Is there anything we can look at and say, from a kind position, we can learn something right now that is dysfunctional within our society that we can participate in changing? Even those people, and I say this as a Jew, that are holding those signs with those rats that, is there something we can do? That's my question. This is the hard work, right? So we can't say that.
And I can say that in my experience, because I come from the working class, and class in America is a very serious subject for me, very serious subject. And I don't ever want to wander too far from my working class roots, because I understand this sort of idea that I remember once when I was in junior high school, a teacher called me the factory rat, and she basically was saying the expectations that we have for you are very low because you're just going to end up working in a factory. And and that was very hurtful, and it's like a long line of hurtful words that we use in our society that I know you've heard and people of color have heard. And this was an educated person. In the working class, my father, my brothers, my sisters, we've all, one way or another, had to confront what it meant to be a working class person. So I know who a lot of these people are. I know that if I sat with them one-on-one, the conversation we would have would very quickly break through barriers, because I've had those conversations with people in the unions I've worked with who, basically say, you don't know what it's like. And I say, well, I do know what it's like, because I've worked in a factory. I've worked in a lot of factories. And they'd say, oh, okay. Well, you don't know what it's like. You've never served in the military. And I go, I do know what that's like. I did serve in the military, and I was in the military for the same reason that you probably were, because it was a way to get money to then change my life afterwards. There's only few paths that working class people could go. And I would, from those standpoint of being able to say, I understand you, I think on a one-on-one basis, I know on a one-on-one basis, I could have a conversation that would be about empathy and kindness. But I, how, I mean, it's almost the idea of now that you would be a missionary going into a hostile environment and not walk out of it. And that's sort of how I feel. I'm always afraid of people who begin a conversation with a threat. And carrying a gun is a threat. But I don't think they're protecting much more than their ignorance in this bubble that they live in with Fox News and Donald Trump, and that's a difference. One of the biggest difference. There's never been such a absolutely sophisticated propaganda mechanism in this country that just repeats the same messages, none of which contain any kindness that I see. It's all about being angry all the time.
So,
So
but here's,
how?
go ahead. Yeah.
Well,
How?
I think so. I don't think that people who see my work, I don't think I change minds. I think I make people who I agree with feel they're not alone, right? And feel that that I can make them laugh at the absurdity of our times. But what I get from people who don't like my work is the scariest it's ever been, the angriest, the
Their
most
response
threatening.
now is the scariest, you're
Mhm.
saying.
Yeah,
But see,
because
that's, go ahead, because,
because they threaten you.
right.
They may not they may not be able to get to me, right? So I don't feel like there's someone lurking out in the bushes. But it's different than the old way, which is actually to disagree with you in an articulate way, right? I've
But
had
see,
very good conversations with people who are conservative, but have this element of empathy and have this element of kindness, I
right.
guess.
And
That
that's why starting this project, exploring kindness first,
is very important. I
because
have to tell you, can I just say, I've been
yeah,
telling people, um, performance artists in California that Tavy and I did a Skype with, or whatever, a Zoom with. And before we left, I told him about what you're doing. And I asked him to think about the word kindness. And several cartoonist friends of mine, I've just emailed the word, because it's not a word it's not a word that, like I said, people say things like, "Oh, that was kind of you," but it's not the concept of kindness, which I'm actually now starting to think of as almost like this need to go door to door and say, "I am here to bring you kindness." I mean, it's just something other than I'm here to bring you anger. I'm here to bring you retribution. I'm here to insult your intelligence. I'm here to tell you that, well, lie to you about what your future is going to be. Those are the things
yeah.
that people resent. And when you say that kindness has to be based in honesty, that is, again, that just like, whoa, that's a really, really serious thing to think about.
Yeah. And I think that that's that's where this whole thing is kind of like both revolutionary and evolutionary, right? Because this is not sustainable, what you're talking about, which is what we're experiencing, you know, that we can no longer talk to each other, that we are threatened by each other, that you're receiving
Absolutely.
so much anti-Gary Huck commentary in these days that are so much more filled with vitriol than they were maybe 10 years ago, you know, and probably more of them. And this is common in our society now. And I think I'm starting to see from this conversation that kindness is the bridge that is broken. And that just that basic foundation of how do I touch you? You know, how do I relate to you on just a human kind level? And that it's my obligation. And this is where I think some of my artist friends don't agree with me, but this is where I stand now. It's my obligation as an artist to activate kindness in whoever I can through my work, you know, and as a teacher through the students I educate, to understand that maybe 10 years ago, kindness wouldn't have been a part of the conversation of theater for social change, right? Which I teach right now. So, but it wouldn't have even have been on the table. We would have been yelling about, let's look at this thing, let's look at that. But if we don't have that bridge crafted, we can't fix this world. We will just keep damaging it. And that's the thing that I just think is necessary and fundamental at this point.
You made me think of something when you said, what would you say to these people holding guns? And there's that famous photo from the anti-war rallies in DC with the hippies going from National Guards person to National Guard person, inserting flowers into the barrels of their rifles. And that, from the standpoint of someone who works in propaganda, and I do work in propaganda, that was an amazing piece of propaganda, because the idea of that rifle barrel becoming a vessel for a flower is, whether you find it silly, ridiculous, you found the hippies to be, that doesn't change what it does to your brain. That barrel became a vase. That image, it became passive. You could see it melt and change from metal to glass, because that's what happens in your brain when you see certain images, and the images don't go away. That to me is sort of an act of kindness. I can't imagine replicating it today with these protesters. I can't. And so not only are they manifesting their fear, they're manifesting my fear.
Yeah, because
and I
we
want to
live
say something
very
else
fearfully. Yeah, please.
That I believe that spending day after day immersed in Trump land is damaging to my psyche. Yeah. Because it's so filled with anger and hate and negativity. Whatever is wrong with Donald Trump, it seems to infect people like a virus, for example. And then I want to say something else, that this conversation, one of the ways Hillary blew the last election was using the term deplorable. Yeah. Because I can tell you that being called a factory rat and being someone who's now being called a deplorable is exactly the point where you've probably lost that person forever. And there probably was a time between Trump actually winning that election and Bernie sort of being forced out, when there was a chance to talk about kindness. Because now that you bring it up, that was Bernie Sanders' same message to the very same people.
Hmm.
His message was, whether you want, we can argue to the end of time of whether he could deliver it, but he was saying, I'm not going to leave you behind.
Yeah,
I'm not
I'm
going
there for
to,
you.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
and that's, I
that
think
was,
that's it. Yeah,
and
because
Trump just said, you're angry, I'm angry. Let's be
let's
angry
be angry
together.
together and let's create more anger. Because somebody mentioned, and I can't remember which of the last two conversations I had, that the idea of community as a safe space is a kindness. And right now, our community, not just in this country, but throughout the world, but let's just talk about the United States, it is not a kind place. So it doesn't feel safe for so many different communities. I mean, for the first time in my life, I've lived a very privileged life and I know it. But the first time in my life, there's been, to be a Jew suddenly, like, you're thinking things that I never had to confront. And that's no longer an entirely safe space. But kindness of one human being to the next, which you said when you were talking about going door to door, and that's what it takes, because you have to have the courage to go to one person and be kind, and that takes vulnerability and honesty and intimacy, and that's a courageous act to be kind in this world,
Yeah. Oh no,
especially to people you don't know. That's
we
that's how we build a safe space and community in a way that is hopeful for our future.
I had a conversation with a journalist who's writing about war metaphors, and they thought they should talk to, a cartoonist.
Did I lose you? Did we lose you, Gary?
Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Yes. Okay.
Gary should
So,
talk to a cartoonist.
and he was asking me about the use of war metaphors, which I don't like and I avoid, partially because they're easy, but partially because we think too much in defining things as conflict all the time. It's either sports or war. That's how we explain almost everything we're doing. We're now fighting an invisible enemy. No, we're not. We're fighting a virus, right? It's not our enemy. It doesn't think of
Doesn't
us
take
any.
sides.
Yeah,
We're all the
right.
same to
And
them.
Trump
Yeah.
actually talks about it being really smart, which is yet another way Trump tells you he doesn't understand something. But it's we talk about marching down fields. We use war all the time, and I'm anti-war in the sense that I don't believe um, I don't think I don't believe that there would have been a World War II without World War I. I don't believe that going to war in World War I was necessary at all. And no one, and I've read and watched everything I can on World War I, and no one's ever told me how it happened in a way that I'm convinced I understand.
Mm.
And so we go to war because we have some fanciful idea in our heads about what war is. And it's none of those things. And here's an example taken right here from Baltimore. The statue that was removed of Lee and Jackson,
Yeah.
that was across from okay, on
From the
the base
BNN.
of
Yeah.
that statue, and the base is still there. On the base of the statue, it says, they fought war like Christians and gentlemen. And that is kind. That, I mean, in a sarcastic way, that's a kind way to define war.
Yeah.
But Sherman, right, he said in a very brief, almost to me, a war poem, war is hell. And that's it. And to me, that's all war is. It's the failure of everything else. It's a failure of every aspect of our ability to communicate to be kind, to be empathetic, and we just devolve into picking up that club and hitting one another. And so I don't believe it's something we should celebrate. We shouldn't build statues to it. We shouldn't teach our children to play it. We should turn our back on those monuments. We should remove them all
So,
monuments of war, except maybe the Vietnam monument, which actually you can't look at without seeing yourself, and
yeah.
therefore it's very effective.
Let me ask you, as we to come toward an end on this fascinating conversation, um, because we've gone into some larger concepts and talked about some stuff that's really serious and happening in our country right now. But when it comes down to it, being kind uh, for yourself, where have you ever experienced? I mean, how do you experience sort of transitioning moments from unkind moments uh, or moments that could be unkind to? I mean, is there any conscious steps you've taken or
Oh,
growth you've had in that area that you think could actually be applicable to this conversation in a whole?
yes, Tavia's ability to presume that someone is a good person until they prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they're not. Um, that I envy that ability because it breaks through my own cynicism. So I try to think about that. And Max and Calder, who of course you know well, their um, their ability to just walk up to anyone and engage them in conversation. That I envy that because I just put up barriers, and whether the barriers based on right, and and it, Jerry Seinfeld put it really well, and I agree with this. That he's aggravated all the time, and that's where his humor comes from.
Mm,
And um, and I understand that. I mean, people irritate me on a by the minute, right? And that's not a good way to go through life. And but there is a so I think I'm learning from hanging around with people that have a natural ability to see good, and um, and and I kind of can see sometimes what they're seeing, and then I do it on the idea that um, if we are in any war at all, betraying my own use of war metaphor, um, I'm exhausted by it,
yeah,
and I I will wave a white flag um, readily if it just would go away,
yeah,
because it will destroy us all, and it will destroy any hope we have of the principles, the imperfect principles by which this free nation was founded, and the principles, as flawed as they were carried out, um, are an experiment in the idea of equality. And equality can't exist without kindness and empathy. It can't. So, and the only thing on the other side of that wall is fascism and hatred and prejudice. And I'm not interested in living in that.
so
So,
here's my question, my final question. If this conversation inspires you to make any piece based on kindness or any aspect that we've talked about, I'd love to see it.
yeah, I actually think it will. As you know, as being an artist, it it always comes out as art.
Yeah.
So it will.
Yeah.
I can't exactly predict what it'll be, but the images will start popping into my head, and I don't know how marketable they'll be, but I
I'll
certainly
promote
would
them.
share them with you.
Well, I mean,
And it's a great this what you're doing, what you're doing is very important. This is very
yeah,
important
thanks.
because I think this will make me a wee bit kinder as a person. Um, yeah, I think it will.
I love
I
that.
am. I think I will become a. Like I say, that I will spread this word. I will bring this up with people,
Great.
and I actually think that is a revolutionary act. That
Yeah.
once you have this word in your head and
Yeah.
you're not quite sure what it is,
You could talk
we
it
can
through
all
with
find
people.
out together.
Exactly. And that's really
Yeah,
all I'm hoping to inspire this week is people to have conversations about it, in all different ways, and to really think about how we can employ this word into action, because I would like a future for your children that is in a world that is kind. I mean, I don't have kids, but I think about all the kids I know. And I
yeah.
want them to have a kind world to grow into. That's
It
it.
takes a village,
It
Barry.
does. And we're all,
It does.
and it's funny you should use that word because that's a very significant word to me. And I see the village as the globe. So the whole friggin' planet.
Yeah. Oh no, no,
Um,
no. It's
yeah.
yeah.
So
So
give your hmm,
I I'm very convinced that that Maxwell will save the earth because
I
he's
love that title. Maxwell Saves the Earth.
yeah. So be of good cheer, people.
We have
Maxwell is growing
Maxwell.
up.
No doubt. I have no doubt. And Calder will be
He-
right by his side.
Oh, Calder will probably just be a little too occupied too, but Maxwell wants to do it. He wants to save the world. So
I mean, I have a very dear friend who has always made me come to the understanding that we don't need to convert the entire planet on to become kind. We just need to convert enough of them to keep balance in our world so that we don't tip over. And I think
I,
if
I
we could just get there first, and then we can
I
move
think
forward.
it's very important that people go back and read about the progressive era in
Mhm.
America, because that was the last era where people had enough of the robber barons and enough of greed and enough of the awful life that the working class and the agricultural class in the South, how people were living, and they tried mightily, and I mean mightily, to change it. And it's if you're looking for a place to start, then read about the progressive era. And the
Good.
Washington Post just did an amazing article about how unemployment came into being. And it's also a love story. And it's just I swear to God, if you go and find that article, you will feel a moment of kindness.
I'll share it.
And yeah,
I'll share it.
okay,
That's great. Thanks. That's
you're welcome.
Gary, thank you so much. Give hugs to everybody
Thank
in
you,
your
Barry.
household, and I'll see you on the
You
street.
got it. Well, say
Bye-bye.
hi to Claudia. Bye
Thanks.
bye.
Bye-bye.